Welcome, everyone, to our final talk in our series this week on gender and global rights to coincide with the 67th Commission on the Status of Women. Today, we're discussing climate justice and gender. And now I'll introduce you to our wonderful moderator, Tanya Haddad, the Assistant Professor of Administration at AUB, and also the co-director of the GEI, Global Engagement Initiative. Tanya, thank you.
Thank you, Amanda, thank you. Hello, everyone. So today we're discussing climate justice and gender. The MENA region is expected to face severe and catastrophic consequences due to climate change. The International Panel on Climate Change has projected that this region will be one of the hardest hit areas in the 21st century. The states that are already struggling with the aftermath of COVID-19 and displacement caused by conflict are likely to be the most impacted. The impact of climate change is not distributed evenly, as it affects certain groups more than others. Women, girls, and individuals residing in vulnerable communities are particularly affected due to pre-existing disparities that limit their control, influence, and availability of resources. However, they possess distinctive insights and backgrounds that are vital in formulating effective climate strategies and enhancing climate adaptation and resilience when acknowledged and respected. Today's panel will explore climate justice and gender issues from various perspectives. We are fortunate to have 4 distinguished panelists with us from AUB, the Arab Reform Initiative, and the Mediterranean Institute of Gender Studies. They will share their research and expertise on the topic and provide real-world examples on their work and impact on the ground. I will introduce the 4 panelists with us. First, we have Dr. Robert Meyers. Dr. Robert Meyers is a professor of English, director of Al-Walid Center for American Studies and Research, and co-director of the Theater Initiative. We also have with us online Dr. Alain Daou. Dr. Daou is an associate professor in entrepreneurship and chair of the Management, Marketing, and Entrepreneurship track at the Alain School of Business, and director of the Nature Conservation Center at AUB as well. Online with us, we also have Christina Kaili. Christina is a senior researcher and project manager at the Mediterranean Institute of Gender Studies. And here with us, we have Sarine Karajerjian, the program director of the Environmental Politics Program at the Arab Reform Initiative. Thank you everyone for joining. I will start actually with a general question for our panelists. What do we know about climate justice? This is a general question we want to start the discussion with. Maybe Dr. Meyers?
Well, I'll try to answer it inductively. Qassar was a recipient of a grant from the Consortium of Humanities Centers and Institutes from the Mellon Foundation, and we participated in an international institute in Pretoria on climate injustice with the University of Pretoria, the University of Sydney, Arizona State, Texas, us. What seemed to become clear is that there is profound particularity, that it affects different areas in different ways. But what also became clear is that along lines that we're all familiar with in terms of class, in terms of gender, in terms of geographic location, i.e. the global south, there's profound disparity. So climate injustice clearly refers to the fact that there's this disequilibrium, that there are more vulnerable groups, and certainly class disadvantaged groups and geographically disadvantaged groups, and certainly this cuts across lines of gender. There are a range of other questions: colonialism, imperialism, etc. So it cannot be seen in a vacuum, and there's not one global answer, but it is manifested particularly in particular places.
Thank you very much. And to continue with the same discussion, actually, this is also a question to Dr. Daou and Christina, and also Sarine, if you want to add to the question, what are the key factors to consider in thinking about climate justice? Alain or Christina? Alain?
Yes. Thank you, and thank you for having me on this panel. I will talk from AUB NCC's perspective and how we look at it. And so from the Nature Conservation Center at AUB. And we have been doing this work for the past 20 years. And in looking at this social injustice, and especially from an environmental perspective, we know that, as Dr. Meyers was saying, that there's lots of inequalities, but also there's, and which I will be focusing on mainly today, is that there's lots of opportunities as well. And today I will be, maybe a bit later, giving some concrete examples on how we can approach these problems and looking at them from an opportunistic perspective to be more inclusive, to empower women and the most marginalized groups in society, so that they become the champions, in this case, of climate justice and climate mitigation. So for me, I believe this is a key angle and focus that we should be taking, because I believe by now everyone is convinced, or at least most people are convinced about the challenges that you are facing, but the solutions are also accessible at hand and often are at the community level. And this is essential for me, the community level thinking, and how we can have concrete actions and projects and programs because there's no one solution fits all. This is a set of small actions at the community level that we have to engage in to face this challenge for the coming decades.
Thank you, Dr. Anna. And actually, to build on this, Christina, I'm going to also build on the questions that I'm asking. Why should we also add a gender lens to the discussion?
Absolutely. I would like to also add that indeed we need to work in the micro and macro level at the same time. This is something at the Mediterranean Institute of Gender Studies that we work a lot on, because we always try to connect evidence-based research with our lobbying and advocacy, not only at the micro level, the community level, but also in the state level. And especially the fact, well, from our own positionality in Cyprus and the geopolitical area where the island belongs, but also due to the protracted conflict that we live in, there are different aspects, intersectional aspects that need to be taken into account. But at the same time, the particularity of Cyprus is also in the fact that we are also members of the European Union. So a lot of the international policies that come top down must be encountered also by a bottom-up approach, the sandwich method. So we always try to combine these different levels of intervention, research, training and awareness, but also policy advocacy, because it's also what we know very well in the region that because of conflict, and of course conflict means also climate degradation, environmental damages. For example, from our own positionality in Cyprus as well, we need to protect our natural resources. We need to take joint actions as well within the island, but also to advocate for this at the European level, but also at the Mediterranean level. And all these parallel factors come with the challenges that women are not part of the discussion. And that's where social justice actually comes in the climate discussion, because if you're not even part of the negotiations table or the decision-making table, that means that, well, women and girls, but also other marginalized communities including refugees, migrant women, rural communities. It means they stay behind from the discussion. So, well, that's what we've been monitoring the last, especially 2 years, where these efforts have been intensified because mainly of EU and international focus. But at the same time, when we come to bring in the gender analysis in these policy documents, let's say, in the national action plans, the Green Deal, the Sustainable Development Goals, that's where we see that actually no real gender impact assessment has been done, or not even a just distribution of budgets. So I'm happy and I'm very excited to continue this discussion with the panelists. Yeah.
Thank you, Christina. Actually, we'll go back to your work on the ground later on, but I want to talk now to Sarine. Sarine, could you just give us also, based on your expertise, on your work on the ground, on your background as well, what is climate justice for you? Why should we look at it from a gender lens?
Yes, thank you, Tanya, for the invitation. And as our fellow previous panelists mentioned, today when we talk about climate justice and you talk to a farmer, I mean, just to give a story here, you talk to a farmer or to a random citizen or resident in Yemen, in Syria, the first thing they would say to you, you're talking to me about climate change when I don't have food on the table. You're talking to me about something that might or might not happen in the future. But then you contextualize it in the stories of everyday, their own lives. And let's give the example of Yemen. They've had a cyclone, 2 cyclones in the last 5 years. They've never had a cyclone in the last 30 years. So we're seeing things happening on the ground. Conflict in Yemen, for example, is exacerbating their current situation because of the climate and the drought and all the difficulties that they're going through. More and more citizens and residents are moving into Sana'a, the capital, who cannot actually accommodate to this large influx of population coming into. So you're adding more and more mobility inside cities, and cities that are now have to accommodate to the changes and give, services to its citizens, knowing that, as we know, and in our own governments, we are lacking. Governments are absent in our day-to-day lives. We're not having electricity in Lebanon. We don't have water in Iraq, which is Biladna Bain al-Nahrain. We've known this since we were kids. Euphrates and Tigris is there, but the water is polluted. So this is what the justice is. Justice for whom? Who will be paying this price? How will they survive these changes and these temperature changes, given that we are already going through multiple challenges when it comes to social conflict, water, resources, and more and more. So it's really asking the question as, what is and how can we define justice, and for whom and by whom? And the other is within our work, also to tap on what Christina and Alain and Robert have said previously. At the Arab Reform Initiative, we're giving voices to those unheard, those who will be affected and impacted the most by the climate. Who are these people? The farmer, you have to talk to them in a ways. And just to give an example, why gender is important. There was a very nice, story here. A Yemeni mayor brought together a town hall, brought together citizens. And this is a real story from an activist who we've known and we work with. And in this, and he first row are all the petroleum companies sitting next to each other. And the first thing he thanks are, thank you for the private and petroleum companies for being with us. And a woman at the end of the table raises her hands and says, really, we are the ones who voted for you. You should be accountable for us, and you're thanking the private companies who are polluting. My son is going through a respiratory disease and having more and more. So public health is now being seen. This is how you sensibilize people. That today you cannot disassociate the politics of the climate, and you cannot disassociate that everything is interrelated and interlinked. You can't think of climate without thinking of the politics, of the different social implications, of the economic situation that we're going through. And we're seeing this more and more. Women were at the forefront in Lebanon for the 2019 uprising, the Tashrin movement in Iraq. It all started with the pollution in Basra. More than 100,000 populations and citizens were hospitalized because of water pollution in the Basra basin, and the government knew about it, and no one did anything about it. So who's responsible for this? This is the main question. And the women were at the forefront of the Tashri movement. More and more in Tunisia, for example, just to give you a contextual example, in Tunisia, in the south, there are major, polluters, and mostly private companies, because of phosphate. It is very much, these companies are phosphates. More and more respiratory health diseases are happening. More and more people are going to the forefront. More and more people are talking about it, but fear is present in this discourse. Today, an Iraqi, Jassim al-Assadi, has been arrested, or not arrested, tortured, and no one knows why and how, because he was protecting the marshes. Other activists, women activists on the ground, were arrested and even harassed in Tunisia, in Egypt, in every single part of the Arab region. So I think this is what we need to contextualize.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarine. And I totally agree with you that climate justice is not a term, it's more than that. It's a movement that acknowledges climate change can have differing social, economic, public health, and other adverse impacts. I want to go back to Dr. Robert Meyers. So my question for you is, as part of your research at the Center for American Studies, what key research questions should frame our discussion when addressing climate justice and gender issues?
Well, I don't want to be presumptuous, in terms of framing the discussion, though I would like to follow up with what Sarine has said. I think she's absolutely right that there's no way to disconnect issues related to environmental degradation, public health, climate, et cetera, and that especially if you're engaged in communication with people who are actually, at least on the micro level, going to change this, you have to have a discourse that's not simply a macro climate change discourse, but one that has to do with how things affect them, their lives, their families. I would give the example, for example, of the use of diesel as a means to generate electricity in Lebanon. It's widely used. It's known to be a horrible carcinogen and for children. So on the one hand, how can you, A, love your children and care about your children and your grandchildren and generate electricity with diesel? We do it, we have to deal with these contradictions, but the starting point is to acknowledge those sorts of questions. The same is true. I'd like to, follow up on what Christina said in terms of having women at the table. When we did a panel on period poverty, women's hygiene, and women's empowerment, what we discovered, and it was not surprising at all female panelists who are looking at the subsidized products in Lebanon after the financial crisis, and disposable razors, all kinds of other products were subsidized. Women's menstrual products were not, and no one had even thought of it. So I think certainly one of the key components is to have people not only in the room, but in positions of power making these decisions. Otherwise, you're going to have myopic policymakers. They simply are never going to think about it. The other thing I think that we've learned, certainly this interlinked question cannot be emphasized enough, meaning social class, geographic location, issues related to migration, war, et cetera, and displacement, But I think the other thing is that we've learned is a collective action, is that individuals cannot succeed in doing these sorts of things alone. And the best example I can give is not actually somebody that we've sponsored, but is Zaina Mokhaled from the village of Arab Salim in the south. who at the age of 70 something decided that the Baladier was not collecting garbage and was told, oh, you're not in Europe, and assembled a group of women who not only collected refuse and garbage, but also recycled and began to then teach other people in nearby villages. So action is at a certain point, even if it's insufficient, even if it needs to be self-corrected, some kind of action. And again, as we were saying, women have been at the forefront of doing this. This is an all-female group that took it upon themselves out of a recognition of what's at stake for their children, for them, for the community. So some of the key questions are looking at it broadly in terms of social class, in terms of locations in the global South, how people are especially affected by poverty, having women and other people who are historically excluded at the table making the decisions on the macro level. And the other is collective action, not sitting around waiting for the government. And this is a perfect example, I think, this garbage example of, if you wait around for policymakers or government, especially dysfunctional governments, it's not going to happen. You may not do it perfectly, but you're going to do it, and you will, as it were, light a fuse. So those are some of the things that we've learned through our interactions.
Thank you, Dr. Meyers. Actually, this is how we're going to continue the discussion. We're going to go globally, and then I want to discuss with Sarine and Alain their work on the ground. Christina, I want to go back to you about, actually, you talked a little bit about the European Green Deal. So could you tell us a little more about what measures have been implemented so far, what remains to be accomplished, and to incorporate mainly gender equality as a fundamental aspect of the European Green Deal and your work on the ground?
Yes, thank you. Well, I have grouped some transnational policies that, because together with the Green Deal in terms of European region, we also see developments, at least in Cyprus and other countries who are members of the European Union, focusing also on the implementation of the Agenda 2030 of the United Nations and the Sustainable Development Goals. For example, it's been 2 years now that we've been discussing the creation of a national action plan on sustainable development goals. 2 conferences took place, and we really struggled to convince of the gender analysis that is needed that needs to be included in a meaningful way. But at the same time, these targets, let's say, of the Green Deal, for example, for the European, for the members of the European Union, have been translated into specific directives, for example, that the member states have to put in place and comply in national law. There is, of course, a level of their ability to integrate it in their national law as much as possible, but at the same time, there are more directives, for example, on sustainability reporting and the audit companies and the different ways in which they can, for example, do the audit reports of certain companies and businesses, which this poses indeed, like Alain said, an opportunity for collaboration with private institutions or with larger organizations who have started reaching out to institutes and NGOs, civil society organizations, because they need the expertise we have. So this is a positive aspect. On the policy and advocacy aspect, though, we are really critical of whether there has been meaningful consultation with civil society and organized groups and the social justice movements. This would be in the human rights sector or the environmental purposes, even the peace movements. And I'm talking also about Cyprus or the Cyprus problem, but also organizations that really carry in their shoulders the humanitarian support for a large number of migrants and refugees who come in Cyprus. And this is also another aspect, because there are groups and communities of these marginalized communities that have expertise, that really want to contribute in finding solutions for the environment, for the society. So, for example, when we were called to do a gender analysis of the reconciliation plans in Cyprus, we were very disappointed to see that not only the budget, but also the basis in which they included the different aspects, for example, the digital transition, the health, the different other chapters of the reconciliation plans that didn't take into account not even gender segregated or sex-based statistics. So these are different angles of the same problem, which reminds us that we need to act in different levels, from the grassroots level till the macro level, like Robert said. What else I wanted to mention? Yeah, and of course the difficulties in which NGOs are called to not only to collaborate, but also to provide support services, and to bring this to listen to the communities that are most affected, and have these ways in which to include their demands and their needs in these policy and advocacy documents, and of course in strategies. And also all these interconnect with militarization. At the moment, we have 6 armies in Cyprus, and of course, all these processes that take place at the same time.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you for bringing up the idea of the role of civil society and bridging policy advocacy with meaningful consultation. And I want to go back to Sarine on this topic, and I know that you work a lot on these issues. So as part of your experience in civil society, working in civil society on the ground, in general, what is your knowledge or experience with civil society movements focusing on climate justice?
Okay, yeah, to build on what also the others were saying, it's really important to define also, the civil society, yes. Who are there? Who are these groups? And because political parties are also, members of the civil society, non-profit, of course, universities, think tanks are all responsible for giving the space. Because nowadays in our region, the spaces are shrinking. If we look in Egypt, it's very hard even to register, even to talk. I mean, we work with Egyptians. We have to do it behind the scenes. We can't even, say who they are, their names, because of fear of them being repercussionary or harassment, etc. But I mean, so yeah, in our work, what we do every day is giving the spaces to the civil society actors, if you can say activists, on how they want to even define themselves, to speak and to raise the voices of those who are unheard. But also, too, is knowledge production, and I think this is very important. And this is the role of academia and think tanks and research centers to create knowledge from and for the region. It's always, all the time we see this. It's a Western agenda. It's a Western. We always quote Western scholars around environment and climate change. But why can't we have our own discourse? Why can't we create our own knowledge that we will need to use, and our own data? This is something that very, very essential. 3, for the advocacy, for civil society, it's the advocacy space, and the coalitions. And we discussed this 2 days ago. It's how much it's important for civil society to support each other, to share knowledge, to also think of, South-South collaborations. We always talk about this. What does it mean? To be able to see that, there is solidarity movements, that you're not alone defending the environmental injustices, but there are possibilities to create these medium or these platforms and spaces.
And how do you think you can impact or enhance more the effectiveness of civil society, especially the grassroots organizations? How can you work with them, enhance their voice in order really to reach a certain change?
Yeah, I think here also there is a side of who's supporting civil society. I think international organizations, donors, they play a big role in the discourse, in what are priorities, and mostly Western donors, and it can be some Gulf donors as well, but really to look at who's supporting these groups, who's supporting civil society, and what is the agenda. Why do we want to create more spaces, and so on. So how can we give them more? The platform is, one is really to know who they are. I think this is what we have done. We've done a mapping exercise as the Arab Reform Initiative, as who's there, who's out there, who are the different stakeholders, and when it comes to environment in the region. And are they really connected to each other, and how are they working with each other? So already knowing who are your stakeholders, it's very important to know how to communicate with them. Two is giving them spaces, of course, as we say, voices for them to publish. We have a lot of young scholars, young activists who don't have the platform. I mean, we have like a Yemeni journalist a couple of weeks ago who contacted us and said, I want to publish with Arab Reform Initiative. And I was, you're a journalist, you already have your own platforms and media and so on, but no, you guys have other followers. Who are the followers? I was asking her, and she said, policymakers. They listen to think tanks. They listen to these kinds of spaces. So but which policymakers is also important to define. Are we influencing from the South? Because Christina, you are here with us and you talk about the EU. Is the space, the Southern Mediterranean, going to influence the Northern Mediterranean? It's also important to engage with dialogues on both sides of the Mediterranean. And I think this is something that we're doing as well, like contacting people inside the EU or other spaces, other European cities, because there are more and more agreements that are happening. Now, because of the war in Ukraine, we're seeing much more projects in Algeria. Natural gas is being sent to Europe. And the largest producers of gas is Algeria, is being sent to Europe. Green hydrogen projects are being signed between the government of Tunisia and Germany and other European actors as well, and European governments. So again, who's benefiting from these projects? And where is the voice of the local communities? Do they really want their resources to be sent to Europe? Do they really want their tomatoes to be sent to Europe, or other, even their own energy, and even knowing that we have a water deficiency in our own countries? I think this is very important, to give voices to civil society. And here maybe we end on a note that these international summits that are happening in our region, the Conference of Parties that is happening at the end of this year in the UAE and last year in Sharm el-Sheikh. We were talking with also activists, and they were saying, no, we don't want any more these, from European activists. They were saying, no, we don't want these summits to happen in the Arab region. You guys need to do reforms. So fine, we will do our reforms, but we need also these spaces. I mean, there was an activist who said this. These are safe spaces for us to express ourselves. Don't reduce them, don't shrink them. Give us more and more spaces. And maybe at the end, about youth as well. They are consulted, youth as a category, as if youth are represented, and youth and women, it's a category on its own, at the end of any decisions, and not in the beginning, because there is a checklist. Okay, we've checked, we've consulted with them, they're happy, but they're never at the table that Robert, you mentioned. The room and the table also is very important. Who are these youth movements, or who are these people who are getting a seat, who are in these rooms?
Thank you, Sarine. Actually, I want to go back to this point about the space with you and Robert, but I want to go a little bit with Dr. Daou. Dr. Daou, recently the NCC has been working intensely on climate justice in the MENA region. Could you share a little bit about your work? How have you been addressing the issue while looking at different inequalities?
Of course. So And just as I said at the beginning, NCC has been around for 2 decades now. So we're celebrating the 20th of NCC. And we are a research center, and evidence-based approach is essential to what we do. But since day one, and this is essential to us, is that we wanted to have interventions with the communities, for the communities. So we are aware that issues such as nature conservation, climate change, climate justice cannot be handled solely from a technical angle. So the social element is important. And this is why multidisciplinarity and multidisciplinary approaches are key. So if we take a simple example of deforestation, this is a multifaceted, problem, and the human element is essential in it, and its core is the core of that problem. But also, as I said at the beginning, it's also the solution. So we have to work with the people, with the community, to find solutions. So hence, a bottom-up approach is as important as these macro decisions and policies. And I think what exemplifies what we do is our vision statement. And I will state it, I will read it. It says, our vision is to make people and communities the guardians and beneficiaries of nature. So this is what we want. We want the communities to be at the heart of what we do. And this multidimensional, problems and solutions, I'll be giving 3 quick examples, one more macro level, and then 2 projects that we have done and that we are continuing to work on to show how women and the most vulnerable groups in the communities can be part of the solution and actually come up with the solutions themselves. So for the first example, we are currently creating the Environment Observatory. So we are proposing a solution where we have access to open data, because we have a problem of open data scarcity, and data which is scattered all over the place in Lebanon and even in the MENA region when it comes to climate change and environmental issues. And this is, I believe that if we want to take and make decisions and empower the communities, they have to have access to information and access to this data. Also, for policymakers, you cannot have sound policies put in place if data is not available and the decision making is not made on data driven. So and I've been consulted so many times, but by most donors, on what should be the next thing we do for Lebanon. And what happens most often is that they will sit with experts here and there, ask them what should be done, because we don't have enough data to base and validate what the assumptions are. And this becomes a real problem. And how it touches, the most vulnerable in this case, which are the youth, the women, the refugees, and others, is that we need that data that can be, disaggregated and take into account these groups in the communities. So this is one thing that we are working on at this time, and I believe that this should become, a reference in Lebanon and the MENA region in terms of decision making. The other example, really from the field, that I would like to mention is the Environment Academy, which is a community-born and expert-backed model or movement, we like to call it, that's dealing with urgent environmental breakdown in Lebanon from the past couple of years. So how the Environment Academy works is that we have community members who come together to expose the problem they are facing, and we support them with experts, and we help them in building a case to find the best solution to implement. And since 2019 that we started the Environment Academy, we worked with 21 different communities, from Akkar to the deep south of Lebanon, throughout the whole of Lebanon. And we engaged over 100 community members, 70 mentors. We were able to close 3 open solid waste dumps. We planted over 1,300 trees with long-term community management. It's not about planting the trees, it's about making sure that 10 years down the road, they are being taken care of. We provided water supplies with renewable energy to about 6,000 people, helped restore over 30,000 square meters of land. And we worked with different municipalities to help them get the equipment needed to fight wildfires. And also we are advancing on creating a nature reserve in Akkar. So you see that all of these interventions are mainly done by the communities. These are problems that the women and the youth, and mainly the key members of these communities who are engaging with us are women and young women and young men who want change in their municipality and town and communities. So we just come and support them. We help them to learn and frame. So here are some key principles that I believe that we have, from this example that we have to take into account, which are community development, a bottom-up approach, citizen science, and this is where I cannot, focus enough on this point of citizen science, and evidence-based decision-making. So when we bring all of these and we bring them together, I believe that we are able to empower and to give, solutions that are durable in time and also that can be scaled to other communities. One last example also that I would like to mention is more one of conservation and sustainable tourism. So what we have been doing for the past 20 years is at the AUB NCC is that we have been training people from the communities on wild plants and wild plant picking, which is often done by women in this case, create awareness and a reason to safeguard, and protect the forests in which and the lands that they inhabit. And also we empower women in projects that are most focused on becoming touristic guides, guest houses. And also a latest project that we are working on is we want to train women from the local communities to become bird watching experts so that they can bring people to the villages to create tourism and sustainable tourism. So as you can see, the solutions here or that we are bringing to the table are one that have economic, social, and environmental values. And this is for me essential when we want to build sustainable solutions, especially for these marginalized groups who are often left out from the bigger solution or the donor-driven solutions in this case. So that's basically it. These are some of the examples that I wanted to give. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Daou. Actually, thank you for adding to the discussion that looking at climate change should be from the social, economic, public health. So we should look at this topic from the different angles. Actually, I want to move a little bit further and ask Dr. Meyers and Sarine, who benefits from climate injustice? Robert?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Who do you think benefits from this climate injustice?
Well, that is one of the mechanisms I think that's indispensable, is to ask that question. And inevitably, we live in a contradictory world, but it's important to realize that we live in a capitalist world now, and that very frequently there is a collision between profits and the health of people. And this goes back to what Sarine's saying in terms of who's funding you. So it is a problematic, it's something we all face in our lives, is trying to reconcile the need for electricity with the health of our children, right? So I would say my own experience has been that if you go back to the grassroots level, as Alain is talking about, and try to be a conduit to people who do have some power wherever they're located, you can affect change. So for example, we we had substantial conversations with the other Al-Walid centers, which are at Georgetown, at Harvard, Cambridge, Edinburgh, Cairo, as a result of the fact that we told the people in these groups that our main focus was on the environment. Then Harvard is now sponsoring an entire series on climate change in Muslim societies, and the people who are looking at it are from the global south. They may be in Boston at the moment, but they're using the platform to talk about, droughts and water level rising in the Maldives and Pakistan and Sudan. They're talking about how climate change affects farmers in Africa and Asia. So in other words, if they have, power and that platform, then why not use it? I mean, yes, there's a contradiction in the fact that our endowment comes from Saudi Arabia, and certainly, fossil fuels in a macro sense are one of the key issues. Nevertheless, a number of these centers, like our own, for example, we fund education literacy, and there are next to no classes, we haven't really talked about this, in public schools. So Rola Hishfi in our education department said, I would like to have a teacher training workshop of how you incorporate questions related to the environment, at least at a very early age. And there again, a disproportionate number of the teachers are women in primary schools and in secondary schools. And the stakes are extraordinarily high. The other question I would say is, in terms of who benefits, clearly the powers that be that include corporate media, are rarely the platforms. Nevertheless, media is very, very powerful, and especially reaching young people and thinking about the ways in which these kind of counter narratives can emerge. I think Sarine also alluded to that. In other words, how do we engender it? How do we support those sorts of groups so that the narratives that people are reading are reaching people, especially young people? Now, I've noticed they really, infrequently are reading newspapers. They don't, they get most of their news from social media, from Twitter, from Instagram, is to be engaged there too. So if you don't create these kind of counter narratives, then the narratives of those who'd like to just sit back and benefit from the environmental degradation, the status quo, they're going to monopolize the narrative. We can't let it happen. Is to the extent possible, in any way we can, whatever networks and whatever partners we can, we can find, we have to find them, use them wherever they are.
Thank you, Dr. Meyers. And stressing on education is a very important thing that I think we need to research more about the role of education, especially in climate justice. Sarine, final notes, climate injustice.
I think Robert, Alain, and Christina did a wonderful job. So in you as well, Tanya. Who's really benefiting from all these big projects that are happening in our region? Two groups, we can say, those who are powerful. This is the paradox also of it. The petroleum companies that are still here. Now the next stop is the head of the petroleum company is also heading the conference of parties, which is it's a paradox. They're the ones who are polluting, but they're also the ones who want to find the solutions and help us in our adaptation processes. So the companies itself, the private companies, and the governments are backing these different companies and legitimizing the whole process of the continuation of pollution and so on and so on. And no one is getting accountable. No one is accountable. No one at the end is really going to pay the price, if we can say. But who will and we will be the ones who will be paying the most severe price, because these are our resources. We have to adapt to these different changes. I think this is what is important. But also going back, I mean, to the different points that I think coalition building is very important. I mean, we're working now much more with NCC, AUB, other universities, AUC, American University in Cairo. Across the region, there are many spaces where coalition building and knowledge production from the region is also very important. And the more we are partnering with each other as think tanks, universities, civil society, the more we can have an impact on the discourse itself, to change it. This is also very important. And I think this is how, in a way, we look at, injustices are present in our regions. Look at Palestine at the moment. There are many solar panels projects happening that are affecting, Palestinians to access their own land, and they don't have even electricity. I mean, this is also a question of sovereignty, as we discussed. Who's really benefiting from these projects? Who is paying? The role of international donors is very important. And I think we need to create our own spaces to influence these discourses and to really have our own spaces that we want to have in our region.
Thank you, Sarine. And actually, this is another discussion that maybe we should have about sovereignty, employment justice, accountability, and transparency. These are the things that also we need to discuss. Alain and Christina, final notes?
Just one word, maybe just to note on this. First of all, thank you all. It was quite interesting. And for me, as long as big corporations and everyone is not paying the real price of what the impact of what the products, production, whatever, and not taking into account the negative externalities of whatever they do, for me, this is one way forward at the micro level, while engaging and continue to create this awareness and this community level. So it's both at the top and at the bottom, working together to find sustainable solutions. Thank you.
Christina?
Yes, thank you. I absolutely agree with Sarine, with Alain and Robert. Just to add on the different points that you raised, Alain, is absolutely the examples you gave as well point out to gender transformative targets that can be really transformative outcomes. And I think that's the source of actually genuine redistribution of resources. Go back to the community engagement. And that's how economic empowerment can also emerge, because they also feel politically heard as well. We have to listen to them, and we must give them the platform, but we also can be part of this change through our coalitions. And I see this a lot from our networks, not in the Mediterranean region, especially, and the MENA region, that we share a lot of expertise and activism as well among us, which I think it's a very important element of this coalition building. Bridging exactly academia with activism from yesterday's discussion as well on sexual and reproductive rights, that was also another taking on how we put these actions and strategies into practice. And last but not least, also I wanted to also reiterate that, we felt the earthquakes here in Cyprus, but at the same time, we experienced this collective trauma. Our Turkish Cypriot counterparts, they are taking their children into tents for schools because they don't feel safe in their buildings. Also in the MENA region, all this war, the Syrian war, so many conflict around us, but also we have also experienced in the Cyprus context the issue of the natural gas that the island has, but it was never brought into public discussion among the different communities on the island. So we also hear a lot of outside interference, and neocolonial powers and different, so who benefits from it? It's definitely not the communities and the rural communities who actually grow, they're employed into agriculture and different kinds of. So I think these coalitions, what we do today here, actually it's beneficial and towards transformative outcomes. I completely agree.
Thank you very much. And I really hope that this is the start of a discussion and collaboration between all of us, because this has been very interesting, and so many research questions were raised, and so many issues that we need to discuss more and sit on the table and address. Dr. Meyers, Dr. Daou, Christina, and Sarine, thank you very much for joining us on this panel and for sharing your experience. And hopefully we will have another one soon.
Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Roy.